Hello everybody. Today we're going to talk about the circulatory system, and specifically what I'm starting you off with is human blood. Okay, so I told you on the LMS page you need pages 45 to 46. If you have those printed, that's awesome. So I'm going to start with the four different components of blood today. And so the first one we're going to look at is called plasma. All right, so you might recall this from grade 10 a little bit. Plasma is the liquid inside of your blood. So I know when you think about blood, you probably think red, right? But if you were to take those red blood cells out, what you would be left with is what they always call it a straw colored fluid. So it's a pale yellow. Okay, so it's a pale yellow liquid consisting mostly of water. So it's over 90% water. So when you think about, when I talk about the fact that blood delivers all kinds of things to you, especially like nutrients from the digestive system, those nutrients are sitting in this plasma. All right, they're not sitting in your red blood cells or your white blood cells. So please keep that in mind. The blood plasma is extremely important. So what does this blood plasma contain? Tons and tons of stuff. I mean, this list is not extensive. Obviously, it's only got a few things on it. But it contains proteins, okay, and we call them regulatory proteins because they regulate things. So some of those proteins are your hormones, okay, and you probably think testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, but you also have things like antidiuretic hormone, which keeps your water balance. You have adrenaline, which tells you when to fight or flight, all of those things, okay. So there are tons of hormones too. Antibodies, so you probably know what antibodies are, especially now with COVID-19. But these guys are white blood cells that are able to fight off an infection that you've encountered or been vaccinated for, right? So it's still encountered. And your enzymes are in there. Okay, so there are tons of good things in the plasma. And that's just one point here. Inorganic substances, so little ions, okay? So we've got iron, we've got calcium. So what are you noticing here? A lot of these guys are your minerals, all right? So products of digestion, the end products of digestion, you're getting your minerals in there. Organic substances, what's the difference between the two? Organic substances contain carbon. And I mentioned this when we talked about the digestion, our digestive system. So these guys are carbon containing, and these guys lack carbon, with the exception of carbon dioxide, lack carbon. So that's a big C there, okay? Lack of carbon, C for carbon. Organic substances, so most of your nutrients are organic, obviously. Okay, we've gone through those. So products of digestion, your fats, your glucose, your amino acids, those guys are riding around in the blood plasma. And then we have to think about the opposite. Once we use these up, we produce waste products, okay? So we have our waste products in our blood plasma, including urea and uric acid, okay? And if those sound familiar to you, you are correct. Urea is like a precursor to urine. So in other words, if we dilute this to some extent with water, we make urine, all right? And then we have our gases that are required. So oxygen and carbon dioxide can actually ride around in the blood plasma. Now, in a few days, I'm going to tell you a little bit different than that with oxygen and typically how it's going to be carried around. But carbon dioxide is in the blood plasma, okay? And we're going to get back to this because that's something I want you to know before you leave grade 11 biology. And then plasma proteins. So we get all these different proteins. Fibrinogen is the one I'm going to focus on because fibrinogen is the one that's called to the scene of an injury to initiate blood clotting, okay? So I will write that down when we get to the platelets. So when fibrinogen is removed from the blood plasma, it is called blood serum. All right, just a term you might have heard before, something you might have learned in healthcare also. So if we take out the fibrinogen, we get a different name for plasma. It's called serum. All right, and then deficiency in blood plasma results in dehydration. Remember, plasma is 90% water. Okay, so we're going to flip this over, and on the back, we're starting with red blood cells. So red blood cells, okay, carry oxygen to your tissue cells. All right, the one thing I want you to be aware of is at maturity, these guys are lacking a nucleus. So here is our mature red blood cell. And if you're wondering what I mean by maturity, remember cells go through mitosis, right? And so when you get that brand new cell from mitosis, it's not mature, it's brand new. but after a little bit of time, it matures and it hollows itself out in the center so that it doesn't have a nucleus. And why is that? Because in the center, I'm going to use red anyway, we have a molecule called hemoglobin, HB for short. Okay, so HB is hemoglobin. And hemoglobin picks up oxygen and it carries it around. So oxygen is very, very attracted to hemoglobin. It's a chemical reaction. And then you make something called oxyhemoglobin, which I'm going to show you in a few days. So oxygen is attracted to hemoglobin, and so hemoglobin typically can attract up to 4 oxygen molecules. And so when we tell you that your red blood cells are responsible for carrying oxygen to your body, you now know why. It's because of the hemoglobin in the center. And here's just one more interesting fact for you. Hemoglobin contains iron, all right? So people that are deficient in red blood cells, okay, or have anemia, for instance, and they don't carry enough oxygen in their blood, it's because they're lacking iron in most cases. So they're iron deficient, and so because they're iron deficient, they can't make this molecule hemoglobin, and so they can't carry enough oxygen in their red blood cells, and so they often look pale and tired. Okay, and so all you need to do is boost that iron level. So, of all the cells in blood, so keep in mind this, all right? Plasma is a fluid. These are your cells that are riding around in this, okay? So these are cells, all right? These guys are the most numerous of all your blood cells. And you're going to do a very, very makeshift small lab showing you that. You've got red donut-shaped cells, okay? So donut-shaped, and they lack a nucleus at maturity. They contain hemoglobin, and they last about 120 days. So every 4 months or so, they die. Now, that doesn't mean that on every 4 months, every single one of your red blood cells is dying, because they weren't all created on the same day. But they last about 4 months in general, okay? And where do you make them? You make them in bone marrow. Okay, so that's all I'm going to really tell you about the structure of the red blood cell. Right now, I'm going to shift over, okay? And we're going to make a table based on blood types, okay? So what you guys want to do is make a table, okay? I'm just, looking for, I guess I'll go with purple. And what we want is, that's for blood type. You need a column for antigens, antibodies, can donate to, can receive from, whoops. Okay, sorry guys, can receive from, and that's it. Okay, so you want, let's go with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns, and then we need 5 rows. Okay, so if you want to pause this, you can do that and make your table. I'm just going to draw in front of you guys, all right? Sorry, I probably should have done this ahead of time. Okay, but if I was in the classroom with you, we always do this together. All right, and your first row, again, is just for your titles. Okay, and then we're going to have 4 different blood types, as you know, from genetics. Okay, and in genetics, I told you I'd get back to this. So had it been a normal school year, I would have said, let's amalgamate the 2. Let's put the 2 together. Okay, these guys are going to get a little bit more room at the bottom. Okay, so here we're going to say blood type, and we're going to say antigen, so that's the protein, and we're going to say antibodies too, antibodies, and we're going to say can donate to, and can receive from, I before E except after C, right? Okay, can receive from. Sorry, my writing is not great on this slant. And then we're going to say special names. All right. So, blood type, antigen, antibodies, can donate to, can receive from, special names. So let's start out with type A. That's where we usually start. Okay, so type A. If we look at type A, okay, we're going to draw our little donut here. Type A. Type A, and they're not actual A's, but type A has certain proteins on the red blood cell that we call the A antigen. Okay, and so type A has A proteins. So type A has the A antigen. That's the actual answer here. Okay, type A. Type A has antibodies to the other blood type. So the other blood type would be B. Okay, so I'm just going to go back here and just fill this in. So we have type A, we have type B. You guys know, probably, hopefully you can guess, we've got AB from genetics, and then type O. Okay, and in genetics, I told you how you got those. Remember the I, all of that recessive and dominant stuff. So here we have antibodies to B. With type B blood, can you guess what antigens you have? Hopefully you guessed B. All right, so you've got B antigens, and it doesn't matter how many you put on there. So in other words, this is what you need to know. On your red blood cells, you have certain proteins. They're not little A's, okay? They're little proteins that sit on here. And these proteins are different than these proteins. And we call these A proteins, and we call these B proteins, okay? So the antibodies, type B blood is carrying B antigens. It's carrying A antibodies, okay? And type AB blood, if we deal with antigens, hopefully you can guess, and I think we've discussed this before, because it's IAIB, it has both proteins on it, okay? And so it doesn't contain any antibodies, because if it contained A antibodies, what it means is it would clot its own blood. And if it contained B antibodies, it would clot its own blood, okay? So we have no antibodies, none. And then type O blood is lacking those extra proteins altogether.